You know, on this tour, we just could have had a little pre-recorded tape loop that said, "Man, what a set!"
It's true.
You know?
I was thinking they start doing Lost Sailor and Saint of Circumstance, and I'm thinking that can't be the end of the set. I mean, that and then Jesus, they just kept going. That Let It Grow, Jeff's good piano solo at the end there.
Yeah.
My
And
mind is.
that beautiful China doll in between the two major works. Well, why don't you run down the whole set because it's all worth mentioning.
I have it written right here: Cold Rain and Snow, Loser, Dire Wolf, Lost Sailor, Saint of Circumstance, Big Railroad Blues, China Doll, and Let It Grow. It's just, I mean, I'm not given to hyperbole. I'm somewhat of a critical listener, but this is amazing stuff.
Yeah, at a certain point, your critical listening just says, "I surrender."
Well, if I'm a critical listener and I'm being incredibly satisfied with what I'm hearing, there's nothing to critique or to be critical about. Critical means
Exactly.
listening carefully, not
That's right.
dissing. Anyway, we're here to rave about the music and persuade you to check out the paid live streams at nugs.net. You can go to livedead.co. If you're watching this free preview on Facebook or YouTube, we're here to convince you that this music is so great. You need to get over to livedead.co and pay for the stream so you can watch the whole rest of it. If you tune in now, you can go back and watch the first set later. And in fact, you have 48 hours to watch the whole thing as many times as you want. These are definitely going to be worth revisiting, in my opinion.
Oh, absolutely. I have done so on numerous occasions. There are certain shows where I've gone back to savor certain moments or whole sets because I just could not believe what I was beholding in real time. So we really recommend this, and of course, you can have the audio portion of the music forever if you do the downloads, or you get a streaming subscription to nugs.net, which has every Dead and Company show going back to 2016. So you can savor this stuff that's been going on for 6 years now, 5 years, 6 years. I don't, yeah, going on six. And just follow the development of this band to this point, which is, I think, the all-time high so far. But I wouldn't put it past them to top it next year when they go out again. We hope they go out again. So check it all out at nugs.net or livedead.co.
Speaking of nugs.net and livedead.co, we have the CEO of nugs.net and livedead.co with us tonight. He's the founder of Nugs, and the reason we're getting to do all of this, please say hello to Brad Serling. Thank you, Brad.
Yeah,
How's it going? Good to see you.
great. A grateful nation gives their thanks to Brad Serling and nugs.net.
That's funny. I just got a message on LinkedIn tonight from somebody who said, I just want to thank you for sharing all this music with us. So it's good when people notice and actually enjoy what we do.
It's so amazing. We've been raving about it for the entire tour since we've been doing this for every show, basically, except the ones where the weather made it impossible.
Right. Like the first night.
We're in this place where the technology exists to pipe really, really high quality audio and video in almost real time to everybody all around the country. So we don't all have to go to Phoenix to see the show. How did we get here, Brad?
Well, you just reminded me of something. When Phish was playing a series of shows at the Bill Graham Civic, they did that for years. They did multi-night runs. And I think it was maybe 2012 or something. Dan Healy was a special guest. And so he was backstage and, they were kind of giving him the dog and pony show and showing him everything that we do, showed him the live mix room where we had John Alchler doing a live audio mix for the recording, but also for the broadcast. And then I showed him what was happening in Webcast World where we were streaming the show live. And he was like, man, if we could have done this with the Grateful Dead back in the day, and we tried, and he told me the story of what that show from November 70, when they had the two different FM stations broadcasting in parallel, and it was a quadraphonic live mix. And was it also on TV that night, or was it just?
Yes. It was on TV. It was called Calibration, Calebratio. And I just happened to have seen it on YouTube the other night. The music was really fantastic. But yeah, I was in San Jose in high school, and we got two stereo systems together, and one station broadcast the front pair, and the other broadcast the back pair.
Yeah, it's crazy to think that that's what they were doing in 1970, and here we are 50 plus years later. And you can watch it on your phone, you can watch it on TV, you can watch it on your computer, or watch it when you're driving home. Definitely been a few times I've been picking my daughter up from school and had the show on while I was driving. So, don't tell the SFPD.
I also, as a for the fans to be able to download the show within an hour of it being over, I mean, that's just fantastic. And for me as a radio producer, it's amazing to me. I used to have to make notes and then wait a few weeks till I could get into the vault to copy tapes and put them out on the radio. Now I got it the next morning to put it out on the radio. It's just you've made my life much easier as a broadcaster as well.
Well, I'm glad. Though we do have to thank Jacob, who not only is engineering these live chats on Dead Air, but he is the one actually doing the edits each night on Dead and Company. And similarly, with Fish, we have Micah, who for years was doing this for me. So we've, and it was me back in the day when I started the company. I was the one sitting there at the soundboard with Fish, making the recording, up all night doing the edits. 20 years ago, we were waiting on the upload speeds to catch up with what we were doing. So there's a lot of logistical BS that we had to deal with. Now, thankfully, that's all been solved for the most part, to the point where we can do these live 4K broadcasts every night, which was unthinkable even 5 years ago. To answer your question, though, how we got here was, a lot of perseverance. But it was, it's crazy to think, going back to, my first Dead show, which happened to be in '88 at the Spectrum. And, I immediately knew there was something special there and that I had to see this band as often as possible, because I just felt like it was going to go away. It was very fragile. And this whole, everything from the vibe of the fans on the floor of the Spectrum that night, and to, of course, the band on stage. Certainly Jerry was not looking the healthiest and around that era. So, it just felt like this was something that was going to go away, and I had to see it as many times as possible. That's what drove me to go see them repeatedly, and what drove me to start recording them. That, and just the desire to have the tapes. So, a couple years later, I bought a tape deck, started going on tour. It was summer 90. And I was really thrilled when they put out the first View from the Vault, because that was the first show I taped, and I couldn't see a fucking thing because the taper section was behind. They had the summer 90, they had playing this was Three River Stadium. So, they had this massive video rig and, and the soundboard where Healy was set up. You couldn't see a thing from the taper section. So, whatever, took it for the team, made the tapes, enjoyed the show. But I was really psyched however many years later when they put out View from the Vault. But that was the beginning of the journey of taping the shows and having this feeling that I wanted the recording so that I could listen to it on the drive to the next show. And that summer I did, I think, 6 of those shows just as a taper out in the crowd. And then it just kind of, the momentum for me grew from there, because by that fall, that was the summer after I graduated high school. By that fall, I was in college, and the Dead were playing 6 nights at MSG. I was at school at Cornell in upstate New York. So, of course, we just went down to the city. I'd only been in college for 2 weeks, but said, I went to see the Dead for 6 nights. Stayed with a girl from my high school who was at NYU. So there we are, staying, on Washington Square Park, seeing the Dead for 6 nights, taping each night. And interestingly, one of the guys who was staying with us was Amir, who did the Long Straight Trip movie. Right. So that's when I first met Amir. He was at Brown with my now business partner John. So this is going way back. We're all from that same era. I mean, not as way back as certainly Gary, some incredible shows you saw in the early days, but for me, that was way back. But that was really, it planted the seed. Being at those 6 MSG shows and in the taper section, I was wearing a Steal Your Face with the Cornell logo in it. And some dude in the taper section was like, "Oh, you go to Cornell? Are you on the DeadNet?" And I was like, "DeadNet? What's that?" I'd been on BBSs and stuff and, knew about this thing that was the internet. Remember, this was 1990. So, I knew this thing existed, but I wasn't really, on it. I didn't know what he meant by the DeadNet. So he told me there's this news group called Rec Music G Dead where people swap set lists and, you can make ticket requests and trade tapes. And I remember somebody said David Gans is on there sometimes and he posts stuff. And, I was like, oh, because I'd been listening to the Grateful Dead Hour since I was like 13. So I went back to Cornell after, playing hooky from school and missing my first prelim exam or whatever it was. Got back and interestingly, I saw Fish for the first time about 2 weeks later. So all this stuff kind of happened right around the same time. But I went to the Cornell Computer Center and I already had a modem and everything. I was like, how do I get on this thing called DeadNet? And they were very patient with me. And they were like, here's what you do. You dial into this number and use your account. Every student has an account, but not everyone, really it was only computer science students. I was a history major. So they walked me through it. I got on Rec Music G Dead. And as a freshman at a very big school, I didn't make a lot of friends at first because I was, I pretty much took off for 2 weeks to see the Dead right when school started. And I had some friends that I'd made, friends in my dorm. One of my best friends to this day was in the dorm room across the hall from me. And he saw my Dead tape collection and we immediately became fast friends. He was always like, give me the best Stella Blue. So, some of those guys are still friends to this day. But my point was that community on Rec Music G Dead really became my friends. And, especially when winter hit in Ithaca, New York, it's pretty brutal. And there's a real sense of loneliness that kicks in for a kid who's away from home for the first time. And, I found that getting on Usenet and talking to all the people on Rec Music G Dead was really it was amazing. And I would go and talk to my friends in the dorm and play tapes and ever and tell them about all these people that I was meeting online. And they thought it was a little weird. I'm not sure they really understood what I was saying, but I felt like I had this whole community of friends. And there were people from the Well. That's how I discovered the Well. And, I was like, wow, this is amazing. And that's how I got my tickets. I think I had mail ordered for New Year's 90. But then I had to swap tickets with some people on Usenet just to make sure my friends had tickets. And I flew to San Francisco that New Year's, which I think was my first time in San Francisco. Maybe it was my second time. But I remember flying out for, and I'm an East Coast kid in school in the Northeast. It was freezing. Coming out to San Francisco, which was also freezing, but at least it was California. And went to the Oakland Coliseum. And I was actually telling this story earlier today. You were talking about what it was like when Bill Graham was around. I remember being in the parking lot of the Oakland Coliseum. It was 4 o'clock because you would line up. It was GA on the floor. And if you were taping, of course, you wanted to get in, get a good spot. So we were lined up around 4 o'clock. It was freaking freezing, foggy and cold. And Bill Graham is there with a thermos serving soup to us online. And, at the time I was like, oh, that's cool. Yeah. And I knew who Bill Graham was. And I was like, that's really cool. And now you think today, could you imagine Michael Rapino standing online serving people soup on a cold day? I mean, he's a wonderful guy, but it's just that ethos. And that always stuck with me, especially as Nugsnet grew over the years. It was that's how you take care of your fans. And interestingly, bands like the Grateful Dead and certainly Fish and something I never would have expected, but bands like Metallica, they know how to take care of their fans and it's fan first. And that's why I work with those bands and those bands work with me and we work with the fans to engage them in things like this. And another reason why we're doing this show right now, we don't need to fill the time I didn't have to hire you guys and do all this stuff. It's to keep the fans entertained and do something cool. It's we have this medium, let's do it. But that was really put in my head by Bill Graham on that New Year's Eve cold afternoon when we were waiting to get in and set up the tape deck. And then once inside, I remember the volleyball net set up in the back of the floor. So you're waiting, you get in early and, there's a lot of time to kill. And there's Bill Graham on the floor playing volleyball with Branford and Hornsby and a bunch of random deadheads. And it was just the coolest thing ever, almost cooler than the show. And the show was pretty fucking cool because you had Branford coming back for the first time since the Nassau 90 show, which I was also at, told my mom I was visiting colleges and, went up stewing on Long Island, saw 3 nights at Nassau and, played hooky a little bit. We went to Hartford on that tour. And that was an amazing tour. I mean, I think that spring 90 tour, just retrospect, in my lifetime, that was the best Grateful Dead I ever saw. I mean, just unbelievable stuff. And I listened to those boxes they put out, the 2 spring 90 boxes, just incredible stuff. I mean, that was, so take us up to today. And here we have this band out there with 3 of the same guys, and Mayer and Oteil and Jeff. I mean, it's just incredible that they're still out there doing it and doing it at the level that they are tonight and, the previous nights on this tour. So that's how we got to it.
Yeah. Well, and also, another amazing thing about how we got here is what's possible now is sort of the culmination of what was just a pipe dream for a lot of us way back then. Like, wouldn't it be cool if you could download, a Grateful Dead show? But, we all had dial-up modems that took forever to get through, and storage was incredibly expensive. And the technology had to catch up with the vision, and it's been doing that, sometimes in small increments, but sometimes in amazing leaps and bounds. I mean, I watch the quality of these videos, and then I think back to the early days of the Dead using video in arenas, and it was like a 3-camera shoot, and it didn't look very good in low light. For indoor shows, it wasn't that great. It was better outdoors. But, now the resolution and, the fact that cameras are so much more compact and you can use, robotic cameras and all kinds of things like that. It's just so much more fulfilling experience and so much more like being in the moment at a show.
Man, there was a shot at one point during the last song, there was a shot of John's guitar reflected in the side of the piano. It was just so very cool. And it just lasted like 5 seconds, but it's just really neat.
Yeah. Well, the quality of the lenses has gotten better, and certainly the storage, being able to capture that high resolution and store it. I mean, that's the logistical challenge, which is that in and of itself has gotten so much better in the last couple of years. And then ultimately it's the bandwidth that allows us to do this. Thankfully all the Live Nation sheds have at least gig fiber, at least one line, if not 2. Then of course you have the arenas like the MSGs and the forums, places like that. They are wired to the gill because they're major sporting hubs. So that's really benefited us and enabled us to do this, as opposed to bringing out, there's been a few times we've had to bring out satellite truck as a backup, but that's becoming less and less of an issue, unless, when we're down in Mexico, we have satellite, because it's just not reliable otherwise. But the fact that all the arenas and the amphitheaters are now wired with incredible bandwidth is great. It's been a game changer for us and allowed us to do this and do every night as a pay-per-view, which we really couldn't do a couple years back.
Yeah, I remember that, we were all talking about this. You were working with the folks at Grateful Dead Merchandising at the time and trying to come up with ideas to make the music available, by media other than CD. And this was actually a couple of years before the iTunes store opened, or the iPod was widely available. And when the iPod came out, it was those little 5 gig things, and I remember having a conversation with Cameron Sears who said, yeah, they're working on these new things where you could have a whole tour on this one handheld drive, and now it's so commonplace,
I remember I had an assignment one day. So quick backstory, the Grateful Dead Productions had hired me in 2000 and I worked for them for 18 months. And one of my first assignments was to go buy a Creative Nomad jukebox, which looked like a Discman, but it was a hard drive inside. And we took one, put a Steal Your Face on it, and I loaded it up with a bunch of my favorite shows and handed it to Bobby. It was like, this is how we're going to deliver shows, because 21 years ago, that was the way that we were going to deliver shows. And
I think I remember. Did I meet you around then? I think
you might have been at that meeting. I think, David, you and I first met at the Maritime Hall in '97 when you were playing with Phil. That's the first time we met face to face. But another quick backstory, I was emailing David in maybe 94, 95 to figure out a way to put Grateful Dead Hour on the web. And at the time I was working for Adam Curry, who was the big hero at MTV VJ. And He quit
Yeah.
MTV, started a company called On Ramp. I was his first employee. That was my first job out of college.
I remember. Well,
So I was sending David these proposals of, oh, hey, we'll put the Grateful Dead out. People can listen to the audio, because Real Audio was one of our clients. We were one of the first people to use, which was the first commercially available streaming format for audio. So I gave David this pitch. Oh, we'll just put up Grateful Dead Hour, we'll stream it, and we'll get sponsors attached to it. It didn't go anywhere for a variety of reasons, but that was the first time I'd reached out to you.
It wasn't for my lack of desire. You and I were all set to
No, I
make
know.
it. It ran into the usual obstacles. But
it wasn't.
Anyway, back to the story you were telling.
Yeah, the hard drive with the.
Yeah.
Yes, the interesting thing that I guess, I don't know if it's public knowledge at this point, but I don't think there's any secrets now. Back then, there was this notion of Project Bandwagon, and that's what I was hired for. I was hired to be essentially the CTO of Project Bandwagon, which never actually happened. But the idea was that the Grateful Dead, who certainly had the history and the vault and Grateful Dead merchandising and all that stuff in-house at Grateful Dead Productions at the old warehouse on Belmar and Keys. So they had all this infrastructure. And then you had Corin with Dave Matthews Band and what he had started with Music Today. And you had Fish, certainly, that was very much doing a similar thing along their own path. And then you had bands like Pearl Jam. And you had, later on, there were a couple other artists involved, like U2 and Dylan and some other stuff. But when I was hired, my very first day on the job was a meeting with Bobby, Billy, Mickey, members of the Grateful Dead staff. David Lemieux was there, Dennis McNally, of course, but also Jeff Ament from Pearl Jam, Bierman, who ran the fan club. Kelly Curtis was there. And, the idea was, hey, we're going to pool our intellectual property and create this entity. And, at the time, the thought was to go public. That was right before the market crashed in 2000, or the first .com crash. But the idea was, hey, we're going to take control of our own destiny and distribute the music on our own terms. And I was like the technical advisor, because my day job was building Budweiser.com and the NFL's first website. And, I had done the Grammys and all this, first generation of .com sites. And I was running Nugs.net as a fan. So they saw what I was doing as a hobby and saw what I was doing professionally. And, they figured I must know what I'm doing. And, like they said when they introduced me to the band for the first time, this is Brad. He runs this site called Nugsnet. He's the only one on the internet not ripping us off. so that's how I got the gig.
Yeah.
And that's what led to that meeting with the hard drive that I, showed Bob. And I remember playing him, like, I think it was that Des Moines show from '74 that's now released as one of the Dave's picks or something. It has that Eyes Big River that I just always love. So I played that for him off this device. I was like, this is the coolest thing ever. This is what we should be doing. Also pitched that to Corin. That was the first time I met Corin Capshaw, who's now Fish's manager. But back then, he was Dave's manager and had just started Music Today. So interesting the way this has all come around. And, long story short, we could never get it off the ground with all those different bands. Through Bandwagon, I met John Paluska, who was managing Fish, Fish's original manager. We really hit it off, and Fish had just broken up. Fish, the first last show ever was October 2000 at Shoreline. Bobby came out the night before. Then the next night was first last show ever. So that was the first time that Fish had invited me backstage to meet with Paluska and Jason Colton, and we sat there and just had this brainstorm of like what live Fish could be, even though the band was breaking up. Basically, everyone pretty much thought the band would get back together. Nobody knew when, but they were just taking a break. So we planted the seeds for what became Live Fish, and I ended up doing it with Fish. So Project Bandwagon kind of wound down. And I went and Fish came back New Year's 2002, and that's when we started Live Fish. That's when Nugsnet went from just a fan site to a commercial service where you could pay $10 and download that night's Fish show the next day, which is really the genesis of what we're doing here tonight. And here tonight, we're doing every single thing that Nugsnet does as a company. It's a pay-per-view in HD and 4K. You can subscribe and get access to all the shows and all the other bands we work with. You can still buy downloads. You could still buy it on CD. If you're at the show, you can scan your ticket, scan the barcode used for admission, and it unlocks the stream of the show. So pretty much every single thing we do as a company is being done by Dead and Company, which makes sense. I mean, of all bands, they're the, the ones who do everything. And now Fish is doing Fish was doing all those things, but didn't pay-per-view every night until this tour. And that's because of COVID, basically. We decided so many people who can't make it to the shows. They always had the feeling, well, let's not kill the golden goose. Let's not pay-per-view every night, even though we can. So the audio has been going out every night for Fish since 2000, but video was not an every night thing until this current tour. So now Fish and the Dead are doing everything we do. And then other bands like Pearl Jam, Bruce Springsteen, Metallica, they kind of pick and choose the different things that we offer based on what suits them at that time.
Right. Back I think it was around the same time Bandwagon was trying to happen. I talked to the then head of Grateful Dead merchandising. He said, if we could get Springsteen, if we could get into Springsteen's vault and start, putting his stuff in, and he said, it'll never happen. John Landau will never go for that. And Nugs.net has an incredible archive of Bruce Springsteen stuff that's coming out, both archival stuff, and they put out the shows, quickly thereafter when he's on tour.
Yeah, when East Street's on the road, we put out every night, and that I honestly still can't believe that I get to do that, that I have unfettered exclusive access to the Bruce Springsteen archives. It's just like, it's insane. As a kid who grew up in Philly and the kind of the shadow of Bruce, Bruce in the 80s was like the biggest thing ever. So, I still get a kick out of it when I see my 12-year-old girl in her Born in the USA t-shirt that I got her the last time Bruce was on tour. But it's, and Landau is like, what a mentor. I've learned so much from him. It's just a privilege and an honor just to get to talk to him on a regular basis, because we put out a monthly archive series. So we're back and forth on, which show we're releasing and where it's being sourced and who's doing what. And, it's a lot of times where he'll nix the show, which can be frustrating, but he always has a reason. And it's amazing, his memory, that he's like, this one, but what about the night before? Where, how does he fucking remember this?
They just put out Danny Federici's last show. He was already on leave from the East Street Band.
So we did on Friday.
He was with a terminal illness, and then he came back to Indianapolis for one night and played with the band. And I'm so glad that's out and available, because it's so poignant and beautiful. But it coincides with so much of my taste, what you have on Nugs, and it's kind of my dream app, having having Wilco and having My Morning Jacket and all generations of bands too. It's not all, jam bands. It's not all, it's a little bit of everything. It's a really wonderful banquet to choose from.
I did want to mention, we worked hard to get in time for the Dead tour. We got the New Riders, the Purple Sage up. I mean, there's only a handful of shows they've released, but everything that's been commercially released is now streaming on Nugsnet as well, alongside all the Jerry solo stuff that's been coming out through the Garcia Provisions, and Old and in the Way, the Grisman stuff. We put up the acoustic disc catalog, which we had for years as downloads. But now it's streaming as well. So if you're subscribing to Nugsnet, you're not only getting the Dead and Company tour, you're getting Old and in the Way, the complete boarding house sessions, which is like, all every note played at those shows that became the Old and in the Way album. And then all the cool stuff that Jerry did with Grisman and New Riders. And of course, all the Dead and Company shows.
I just love the fact that it's a music lover who's in charge of all this. We had the first interview we did in this series was with Don Was, and he talked about how much he liked working at Blue Note Records, where everybody that works for him is a huge fan of the music. So
he's incredible.
This culture of ours has really been fortunate to have people who really, really love this music and who arose from this culture to become leaders in it. I just appreciate it. I mean, obviously, I'm incredibly grateful to you for hiring Gary and me to do this, but also just because it's so it's an outfit that I'm proud to be associated with, because you're doing so much cool stuff. And like for me, it's like that Springsteen, that Winterland December 78 show. All right. That kind of thing is totally awesome.
Yeah. A cool Bruce story. It was maybe 2 or 3 years ago. I went to this museum. Now I can't remember the name of the museum. It was like the Museum of Dance or something in San Francisco. They had this archive of tapes for some reason that had been bequeathed to them. And one of the reels that they pulled out was the first known studio recording that Bruce had ever done, which he did for Bill Graham for Fillmore Records.
It's at SF Palm, the Performing Arts Library Museum.
Yeah, that's what it was.
The Bay Area Music Archive went through this very long saga and weirdness and getting moved a lot. The Bay Area Music Archive is now housed at SF Palm, so that's what you saw.
That's what it was, yeah. So they had this tape, and there's the tape sitting in front of me, and it was Bruce came out New Year's '69, played a show at Big Sur, and then came up to San Francisco to audition for Bill. Didn't get signed to the label, and nothing really became of it, other than this tape of the band at the time was Steel Mill, and there was 3 songs, and there it is. And I was there to kind of check it out and see if Bruce's organization should work out a deal to reacquire the tapes, which I believe they did. I can't remember where it went, but it was just like I found myself in this little piece of history just kind of by happenstance. Like, oh, that's the first known Bruce Springsteen recording. It's incredible.
That's very cool. I wonder if we should maybe do the Nugs plug, Gary. Realize that we're here to try and get people interested in Nugs.net offering the live stream. If you're watching the free preview, friends, say it with me, Brad.
Yes, you've got to pay us so that we can pay David and Gary and pay the band for this wonderful performance. That's basically how it works.
We just want you to stay tuned and watch the free preview of the second set of Dead and Company that's going to be coming up. And if you like what you hear as much as Lambert and I insist you're going to, then you go over to livedead.co and convert yourself into a paying customer.
Right.
That's why we're here.
Yeah, and I would say that, Brad, the story you've been telling us of Nugs.net and your enthusiasm for all this music and this project is probably going to give the sales a little bit of a bump tonight. I hope so, anyway.
Well, let's hope so, because we have a lot of hardworking people on the road who all need to get paid. This is, people think, oh, it should all be free. Well, that's fine until you actually need to pay for the people who do it, not to mention paying the songwriters. And of course, the band members and all the various components that make it happen. This doesn't just happen by itself, which people said, certainly we got, it was an interesting when we first announced Live Fish going back 20 years ago when, on one hand you had people saying, is anyone else going to feel like an asshole walking into the garden with their mic stand and gear when you can just pay $10 and get it from the band? Why are we going through the effort taping? And we never said you couldn't tape, but then certainly there was a certain segment of fans were like, oh, why are they it should be free. Well, it's not free. If you do, the way the music business works is you can't commercially release music, putting YouTube in its own little bubble for a minute. It actually needs to, the people who compose the songs and perform the songs and all the different rights organizations, everyone needs to get paid anytime there's a broadcast happening. So that's why we are asking you kindly to buy a pay-per-view if you like what you see.
We always thought back in the day that the band was kind enough to let us record and trade the tapes and stuff. And I always thought when they were kind enough to let me put it on the radio. And back in the day when I started doing the nationally syndicated radio show, I kept thinking, wouldn't it be great if the end of every hour I could say, if you like this music, you can call this number and get a copy of it. Right. And that it wasn't until 6 years later that Dick's Picks came into existence. So the technology has followed the inventiveness of this fan base and stuff. But I always thought that since the band was kind enough to let us do all that stuff, then when the time came to do an offering that was to be paid for, that we kind of were owed it to them to buy that thing too.
Yeah. And, certainly, I don't live in a fantasy world where people don't pirate stuff. I mean, I understand that on any given night, probably tonight, there's people trying to figure out a way to get it for free. And, that's always going to happen. And that is frankly factored into the price. We price it at a point where it's going to cover everyone's cost and make up for whatever's lost from piracy, which, maybe back in the day, they call it breakage, when records would mysteriously fall off the back of a truck and artists would get dinged for them. This way we're trying to at least pay the artist. And I think one of the reasons why people like coming to Nugsnet to watch a show or to subscribe to the music is they know that the band's getting paid.
Yeah.
If they're paying Nugsnet, then we're paying the band. There's nobody else it's not like going through. Certainly, we have in-app purchase on Apple, on iOS and Android. So, to a degree, it's going through Apple or Google if you pay that way, or if you pay directly with your credit card, the money is going to the band. And, I think it is worth mentioning that on the streaming basis, we're paying 3 times what Spotify pays on a per song basis. Granted, we're a much smaller pie. I'm a drop in the bucket compared to the sea of Spotify in terms of streaming audience, but our royalty rates reflect that. So we're trying to be as equitable as possible to the artists who are gracious enough to allow us to do this. And so for the bands that it works for, it really works for them.
Yeah,
Everybody wins.
I've always been kind of amused that, Deadheads tend to be very selective in which parts of the Grateful Dead philosophy they want to embrace. That famous quote of Jerry, once we're finished playing, it's theirs, was very specifically about allowing people to tape shows, in the moment and then trade them with their friends for no profit. But then Jerry just as vehemently would say, no, not everything shouldn't be free. These are professional people making music. They're professional technicians who make it happen. They're promoters who rent the halls. He was not ambiguous about that. He was talking about that one specific thing, and artists and all the people who put hard work into this stuff deserve to be rewarded because it's their job.
Yes, I think people forget the music business is a business because it's a business. And like Bill Graham famously said, it's not about the money, it's about the money. So at the end of the day, the companies that are doing this, they need to earn a profit, otherwise they can't keep the lights on.
Right.
Yeah. I think the culture of expecting stuff for free had its heyday in a certain time. I don't hear a lot of resistance to. I think people appreciate the convenience of this stuff. It's reasonably priced, and it's still, if you want to bring your own rig and make a tape in the place, that's all cool with everybody too. And there's people that prefer those audience recordings and all that, and that's not really taking anything away from the rest of this. Seems to me, and I being a person who creates intellectual property as well as somebody who consumes it, I have a tendency to go ahead and pay for stuff because I would want people to pay me if they had my music, right?
Right.
So
and
a lot of people realize that it's a two-way street, and nothing really does come for free.
And that is why we're doing this right now. Every single night we're doing at least 2 songs a night, sometimes more, depending on what they play. The opening of set 1 and the opening of set 2, we stream for free across the band's socials, YouTube and Facebook, as well as on Nugsnet. So you're getting a taste. Here it is. It's free every night. Check it out. If you like it, come and buy the pay-per-view. If not, that's fine.
Yeah.
So we're trying to balance the free and the paid.
Yeah, and I do think, or it's my fervent hope, and I think it's being fulfilled, people are much more appreciative of the hard work that goes into shows after these couple of years we've been through without live music, and the amazing work the crews and the recordists and everybody involved puts into it. So I hope there's an attendant rise in appreciation, of that, because we're so lucky to have it. Brad, we are told the band is heading back to the stage. We never know what the exact moment is. We don't know how we feel about cutting off our boss in the middle of a sentence, but that may happen when the house lights go down.
You can wind it down. I know how it works.
Yeah. But we're so glad you were able to join us, man. This is really great and enlightening and fun.
It's a pleasure. I'm glad we had a chance to actually do this in real time after all the planning that's gone into doing the last 30 plus nights or however many.
Well, again, I thank you for giving us the opportunity to do it. It's just been a gas. All the interviews have been really fun. Jacob has been a dream to work with, and the band is going back to work. Good night, everybody. Enjoy the music.
Thank you, Brad.
Thanks.
Night.
Bye.
We can share the wind and we can share the wine. We can share what we got in yours, 'cause we don't share all of mine. Keep on rolling, just a mile to go. Keep on rolling, my old buddy, you're moving much too slow.
I just drove to watch me right outside the fence. Took his rings for bucks and change. Ain't that heaven sent?
Hurts my ears to listen, shining and burns my eyes to see. Go down a man in cold blood, shining, might as well been me.
and scored one small part of pride.
Ain't no place that man can hide, Shannon. Keep him from the sun. Ain't no bed can give us rest now. Keep us on this bread.